Housing Scrutiny Committee on the 11th of March, starting at 5:30 p.m. Housing Scrutiny Committee taking place on the 11th of March, starting at 5:30 p.m.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Cambridge City Council's Housing Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Griffin, and I am the chair of this committee meeting, taking place at 5:30 on Tuesday, the 11th of March, 2025. Members of the Scrutiny Committee are Councillors Gorthrop Wood, Councillor Gardner-Smith, Councillor Lee.
Chair, we've had apologies for lateness from Councillor Lee.
Okay. Councillor Martinelli. Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Councillor Swift.
Present.
Councillor Tong.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. Executive councillors who attend this meeting are the Executive Councillor for Housing, Councillor Bird.
Present, Chair.
And the Executive Councillor for Community Safety, Homelessness and Wellbeing, Councillor Holloway.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Please may we welcome tenant and leaseholder representatives, Diane Best.
Present, Chair.
Harmony Birch.
Present, Chair.
Mandy Powell-Hardy.
Present, Chair.
And we have apologies from Justina Ullman-Jaworska. Diana Mins.
Present, Chair.
Great, thank you. So apologies have been received from Councillor Fitala, tenant representative Justina Ullman-Jaworska, and apologies for lateness have been received from Councillor Lee. Are there any other apologies? Appears not. The officers permanently present throughout this meeting are Assistant Director, Housing and Homelessness, Samantha Shimon, Assistant Director of Development, Ben Binns, Committee Manager, Sarah Steed, Meeting Producer, James Goddard. Could I advise members of the public that the only public entrance exit from the Guildhall for committee meetings is the Pease Hill entrance. This can be accessed from the rear of the council chamber, turn right, and either use the lift or the stairs to return to the ground floor, where you can then exit the building. The committee will receive an oral presentation from officers. Members of the committee will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. Tenant and leaseholder representatives will participate in the debates on all agenda items, but may only vote on items in Part 1 of the agenda. Part 1 of the meeting will be chaired by the tenant and leaseholder representative. I will then chair Part 2 of the agenda. Please, can I ask members of the Housing Scrutiny Committee and members of the public participating in the meeting to be respectful towards one another. To confirm, the decision makers at this meeting are the executive councillors. Okay, moving to agenda item 2. Please, could committee members advise if there are any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to? I see none. Agenda item 3, minutes of the February 4th, 2025 meeting have been submitted to this committee for approval. Are there any comments, or can these minutes be approved? I think they can be approved. Okay. We now move on to our favorite part, the public question time. Public questions last for 30 minutes. Public speaking rules provide that members of the public must send in the text of their questions in advance of the meeting. Speakers will no longer read out their questions, as a list of public questions has been published in advance of the meeting. The executive councillor or officer has 2 minutes to provide a response. Public speakers then have an opportunity to ask a follow-up question for up to 2 minutes, and the executive councillor or officer may respond as appropriate for up to 2 minutes. The committee manager will advise when the time periods are up. Question number 1, Dr. Chiata, would you like to introduce yourself and advise if you are speaking on behalf of a group?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Maurice Kyoto, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the Say Beacon Road Group.
Thank you. Would the executive councillor like to respond?
Yes, Chair. What I'll do is I'll read each answer out to the questions. So I'll do it in block, okay? Okay, so question one, the answer. The council has to date relocated 47 out of the 82 tenanted households. This is where we expected to be at a midway point in the relocation process. We will continue to offer support to the remaining 35 tenant households and 11 property owners on the estate. We encourage residents to contact us should they wish to discuss their circumstances in more detail or have any questions regarding the relocation process. Question two. Yes, the council relocates tenants on a like-for-like basis unless the needs of the households have changed. Question three. We are working closely with all tenants throughout this year to ensure that they can move to a home of their choice or choosing. If a move has not been possible, the council will make up to 2 direct offers of a suitable alternative property, the second of which will be reserved for the household. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Chiodo, do you have any supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor. I think the crux of the question here today is whether the council is going to see through on its promise to residents to move them in like-for-like accommodation. And this promise was made to residents at least as early as June 2022 at the event when the council presented its billboards to the residents first time on Eakin Road. It may have been made earlier. And our concern is that the promise to move like-for-like is not reconciling with the documentation residents have received, which says that they will be essentially asked to move by December if they haven't moved before then. So I want to reiterate the question of, if you're going to forcibly move people in December, will that forcible move provide them with like-for-like accommodation, or, as you just said, suitable accommodation, which is quite different? One person in a 3-bedroom home might be suitably accommodated in a 1-bedroom flat in the sky somewhere over the other side of Cambridge. But that's not like-for-like accommodation. Like-for-like is receiving another house roughly in the same area, roughly the same amount of garden, roughly the same sort of quality of home. And we want to be sure that these residents, as promised for over 3 years, are going to receive the sort of accommodation that quite rightly they deserve. Remember, the residents of Eakin Road are paying a price for this redevelopment. There are several who don't want to go but have no choice and are being forced out. Let us not forget that. And they are extremely concerned, having received quite a technical legal letter informing them for the first time that they have to be out by December, and that they might actually not receive like-for-like accommodation. It might be as your needs require. So could the councillor please confirm that all residents will receive like-for-like regardless of what happens at the end of this project?
The officer's going to answer, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think it's been made really clear by the exec councillor. Yes, the council will relocate tenants on a like-for-like basis unless the needs of the households have changed. So that much is clear, and that doesn't change. You are right, the tenants receive quite a legal letter, which is necessary for the council to issue by law. That's what it has to do. But I think on record, we're saying the council will relocate tenants on a like-for-like basis.
Can I come back, Chair, as well?
Yes, you may.
We've always been truthful with the residents of Eakin Road. All have like-for-like, yes, we promised that. We also promised the residents if they wanted to move, and once the new build has been built, they could move back into the Eakin Road area. So we've always promised that as well. So we keep our promises. like we do ask that all the tenants get in touch with us if they've got problems, and if they feel they want to talk to us privately, we're here. And also, they can always contact me and I'll chat to them as well. We're here to help the residents. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to question 2. Could Mr. Page, would you like to introduce yourself and advise if you're speaking on behalf of a group?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name is Michael Page. I'm speaking on behalf of the committee of the Hurst Park Estate Residents Association, which has about 428 households within easy walking distance of the Arbury Court shops. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the executive councillor like to respond?
Yes, Chair, and I'll do exactly the same, go through all 3 questions. Thank you, Mr. Page. Okay, question 1. There was a decision at Housing Scrutiny Committee in June 24 that negotiations on commercial lease at Arbury Court will now take account of the need to consider future options for a district centre. There was a decision at HSC in September 24 to develop a framework for change for the North Cambridge. This report noted the importance of Arbury Court as a centre for the area. The consideration for future options is being taken into account in discussions with the commercial tenants. Engagements with commercial tenants will be an important part of the way forward. Question 2. Since that time, discussions have taken place with individual commercial leaseholders whose leases are coming to an end. It is proposed to start community consultations on a border basis from May, and as the September report said, the commercial centre and the commercial leaseholders will have a central role in this. The council will be offering meetings to all of the commercial tenants. No decision has been taken beyond creating flexibility from 2030, and any decision will follow on from the consultation. Question 3. All the negotiations have led to new leases that extend to 2030. While no decision has been taken, I understand the concerns about the impact on the centre. There is a timetable for the consultation process to end in January 26. If there is a decision to redevelop, the council is committed to keeping the shops open during the development period. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Page, would you like to,
Yes,
do you have any, sorry, do you have a supplementary question? Sorry.
Yes, well, thank you for those replies. That's helpful. You mentioned that there has been some engagement with the shopkeepers already, but in my talks with 2 of them, they had signed new leases, but they told me they were in the dark, was the words they used, about ideas for redeveloping the site, or they saw it as a rumour that the place is going to be knocked down. So would it be too much to ask? And you've also mentioned about a consultation ending in January 2026. Would it be too much to ask of officers to produce a very simple 1-page route map through this process? Because clearly the process is currently started and is ongoing, but the shopkeepers are in the dark and they're anxious. So a route map, simple one, would be really useful, I think.
If I may answer.
Yes, you
Chair.
may.
So there are 2 questions there. The first one, the route map, we're going to put on the council's website what's already in the public domain, which is the September 24 report. And in there is some deadlines or dates which explain the process we're trying to follow. So it's a bit like a route map, which we'll make that clear. The other thing is that we will go to and invite each commercial tenant to have a meeting, whether on site or whether they want to come to the council, and we can answer any questions they may have, and that will take place in the next few weeks. And then in May, there will be a wider consultation piece with the residents of North Cambridge, where they'll be invited to participate in the consultation workshops, and there'll be more details that will come out shortly for that.
Thank you. I'd like to thank today's public speakers. Your participation is greatly appreciated. This now concludes the public question time. Please, can I now invite Diana Mins, tenant leaseholder representative, to chair part 1 of today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start, and I know it's not all set in stone, I personally want to record the fact this is, as we believe, if the recommendations that go forward to the appropriate committees take place, the last meeting of the Housing Scrutiny Committee in its current form. I want to say something here, other people may want to later. I want to say it now, to say I've been part of this committee since 2012. Diane Bestover's been there probably twice as long as I have. 23 years of having direct resident involvement, either through the Housing Management Board or the Housing Scrutiny Committee. For those years, we've had elected leaseholder and tenant representatives. I want to record that fact, record the fact that we've enjoyed doing it, we want to do it, we want to continue to do it in whatever form may come out for us in the future. It is important to do that. What we have in Cambridge is a unique arrangement where we do have elected representatives from the tenant and leaseholder residents who are directly elected, and we have a vote equal to the councillor's vote on this board. That is unique, and I think it's something that should perhaps be followed elsewhere, but it hasn't quite been done like that. Past studies have shown that we are unique, and I think that that must be a plus, surely, for when the regulator of social housing comes along and says, how do you involve your residents? So I hope, long may it continue in whatever form it takes. It's been lovely working with you all, as they say, and we hope to see you in some future format in the future. So I just want to say that now, in case there's another chance to say it. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, we're not sure yet whether this is the last one. As you said, it's got to be go to committees. It's got 2 committees to go to. And once it's been decided, then we'll let you know. But at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, nothing's been decided. So this might not be the last one. And I hope not, because I have enjoyed working with you all. And even though if everything changes, we'll still be working together, Diane.
Yes, I'm just saying the Housing Scrutiny Committee, in it, the name that it has at the moment, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Robertson.
I've been involved in working with the other groups, parties on the changes that are coming up, and we have make great care to make sure there is still a role for council tenants and council leaseholders on that committee, because we value it.
Thank you. And we have been really sure, but I just thought it was worth marking this is possibly the last one, and possibly in the last format, in this particular format. Councillor Gawthorpe-Wood.
Well, I want to second what Councillor Robertson has just said. Even if we move to a cabinet system, we want to ensure that there are housing, there are tenant representatives on the new format, and to have a housing committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that's my little soapbox. I finished that, and now we'll go on to agenda item relating to Bermuda flats. Yes, sorry, I've lost my place after all that. Okay, thank you all for the kind words. Right, we've got agenda item 5, which is the structural repairs and associated works at Bermuda Terrace, and I believe that Will Barfield will be presenting this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, this report is regarding structural repairs and associated works at Bermuda Terrace, which is 6 blocks of residential flats that the council owns off Histon Road in Cambridge. And what the report's looking for is for the Executive Council to approve the award of a contract to the contractor that's won the tender evaluation process. This project was added onto the agenda fairly late because we were originally anticipating that the value of the works might be slightly less and wouldn't be a key decision. But when the tenders have been evaluated, the value of works is slightly more than we'd estimated, and so it's now required to come to committee. The detail of the works is set out in the committee report in section 4, and it's primarily structural repairs to the brickwork and to the concrete elements of the flats which were built in the early 1970s. And then there's associated works. We're doing full decoration works around the estate, repairs to the sort of glazed canopies along the walkways, and then surfacing repairs to the walkways and private balconies for all of the flats. There is a leaseholder consultation involved with this work, which has just started. So the award of any contract will be subject to the satisfactory completion of the leaseholder consultation. On the Bermuda Road estate, there's 73 flats, and around a third of those are actually owned by leaseholders. So the consideration of leaseholders' views in the work is particularly important, as there's such a high proportion of leaseholders on this estate. I will just mention that in the implications section set out that we've done quite a lot of consultation about the structural work, and also about a programme of electrical works which is due to follow later on in the year. And we've done a succession of newsletters to keep leaseholders and tenants informed, and there've been a number of residents' meetings on site, and we'll aim to continue that through the leaseholder consultation. We've got some meetings scheduled with leaseholders, and also when the contractor is appointed, we'll be looking to make sure they sort of meet the contractor event, and tenants and leaseholders on the estate are completely involved as the work proceeds. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Will. Only questions. Councillor Gawthorpe-Wood.
I'm very conscious that, because we have leaseholders obviously in King's Hedges, which I represent, and I wonder what options the leaseholders will have in making payments. Sometimes this can be a bit difficult for leaseholders when there are repairs being done. They're not, I have to put this politely, but you know, they're not made of money. You know, our leaseholders in our properties are not usually particularly wealthy. So finding the ready cash, you know, even over 6 months can be quite difficult. Thank you.
Yeah, leaseholders have been aware of the project for a couple of years now, as we've worked towards delivery of the structural works. And actually, leaseholders, the work will be completed within the next financial year. Works will start on site in April, and they won't receive bills for the work until probably September 26. And so there's quite a lot of financial planning in that process. We will be having a detailed meeting with leaseholders to talk about the payment timetable and options for repayment. The council's City Homes home ownership team manages the notices that go out and the collection of payments from leaseholders. And I haven't got the full information here right now to update you on actually the payment terms. I don't think we offer sort of extended payments options for leaseholders, but that obviously will be explained to leaseholders at the meeting that we're going to have with them.
I believe Samantha Simon's got something to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Diana. Yes, Will inferred there about the home ownership team that we have. They are always willing to work with leaseholders. We will make agreements if somebody is struggling financially. But I would also point out that, yes, we do have leaseholders that struggle, but we also have quite a high proportion of leaseholders that actually rent those properties out again. So that's why we look to work on an individual case basis based on people's financial circumstances.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Diana. I'm a little bit concerned. It says here on page 29 that the repairs for Bermuda Terrace are going to start in April. It's around about 1.3 million, for the contract, the contingencies and professional fees. I thought there was a threshold of £1 million. I just wondered if it could be explained how it's been able to go above that. Thanks.
Will, do you want to answer that?
Yes. When you refer to the threshold, are you referring to the threshold by which we have to bring it to committee, which is what we're doing now, because it's £1 million makes it a key decision. So that isn't delegated to the director in the council anymore. We have to bring it to committee for the executive councillor to approve that, which is why we've come here. When we tendered the work, we were estimating the work would be around £800,000. So, we wouldn't normally bring that to committee. But when we've tendered the work, we did get a good response. We had at least 6 tender returns, and the prices were just more than we had estimated, which is why we need to bring it back to committee now. Is that what you were asking for about the threshold? Have I covered
Yeah,
what
I
you were
suppose I'm a bit
looking at?
surprised it's gone up by about 40%. That's really, I'm a bit surprised about that.
Well,
thank you.
there's a range of tenders that we received. When we evaluate tenders, we look at quality and cost, and there's an evaluation framework. So there was a range of tenders. They weren't all. Some of the tenders were quite a lot more than we'd estimated, and some were just a little bit more than what we'd estimated. But we're proposing to award a contract to a contractor that's likely to be more than the £1 million threshold.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, Diane, and then Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gawthrope Wood has already highlighted the financial burden on leaseholders, but I do need to ask Will if in recent years there has already been some balcony floor resurfacing done. If this work involves that again, will the leaseholders be charged twice?
You're correct, Diane, that there was some balcony walkway surfacing and balcony surfacing work done around 10 years ago, maybe slightly less than that, but there are some defects that there has been some movement in the building. That's why we're doing this work. Part of the work is installing movement joints in the long brickwork wall areas, and we think that has caused some movement in the building, which has meant that some of the balconies have been leaking into flats below. So work isn't necessarily required to all of the balconies and all of the flooring, all of the communal walkway areas, but surveys have been carried out, and it is required to some of them, and then the full details of whether it's full replacement or partial replacement will be worked out when the contractors are on site. We don't think the council can't claim this work back as defects from the original installers, because there's been some movement in the building which has caused some of the cracks. So it is anticipated that leaseholders will be charged again for work which is cost that we have to incur in terms to make the building sound.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the energy efficiency of the building. Doesn't seem to be much work on that. It is part of this project. Could you explain, it's not full retrofitting by a long way, but what's the position?
Yes, this is a project which is structural repairs to the building. It is not a specific energy efficiency project, although what we have done in our surveys is we've looked at, it's a building with cavity wall insulation, so we have checked cavity wall insulation. It appears to be present everywhere. We've checked loft insulation, which appears to be in place, but if there could be isolated areas without cavity wall insulation in some of the gable walls, and if that's the case, we will be fitting cavity wall insulation there. And also if there's lofts that need topping up, we will be fitting cavity wall insulation. There's also some areas on the private balconies, sort of underneath windows that meet the balconies, where there's areas where there's cold bridges where there isn't insulation, and we will be fitting insulation there. And also there's garages on the site, and the flats above the garages, and we'll be making sure that those sort of floor ceiling joints in the flats have got adequate insulation there too. Most of the flats are already EPCC on this estate. So in terms of energy efficiency and insulation, we're trying to prioritise properties which are, older solid wall properties that are EPC D, and that's where most of our energy efficiency budget is going at the moment. And most of these flats are already EPC C rated, so we're not prioritising this estate for energy efficiency works at the moment. So there is some energy efficiency work, some insulation works to be carried out, but it's not a whole scale energy efficiency project alongside the structural works.
Yes, I can understand that we can't do everything at once, and you're doing the worst first, and this one is, at least you're doing something on this project, so that's very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly some improvements where there are gaps. That's right. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, Harmony.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring attention to Section D, environmental implications. I understand the ash trees that it is proposed to replace will never fully mature, that they're not fully mature and they will never fully mature. However, there has been a lot in Cambridge of replacing fully mature trees or almost fully mature trees with saplings. Saplings do not have the same environmental effect as mature trees. So we're talking about more appropriate trees, so we need to really consider what are more appropriate trees in these areas. I'm assuming smaller trees because ash trees are too big for the area, but also what plans do we have for making sure that these saplings actually survive and thrive? Because within the city, I've noticed there's a council website where you can say, oh, I've watered a sapling. But saplings need more than that. Saplings need carefully nurturing. We need to make sure that we're not just replacing trees that die. So do we have some sort of plan? Will we be making sort of plan to make sure that we end up with appropriate trees that stand a chance to mature and give us the environmental benefits we'd like?
Thank you, Harmony. We have experience where I live that we had these saplings, they really didn't survive. Perhaps we need something more than saplings, some more mature trees to start with that will hopefully establish better. Anyway, do you have a response at all? Oh, sorry.
Shall I respond to that? Yeah, the arboricultural report that we had done was suggesting that the trees should be removed and replaced with more appropriate species because they haven't grown properly, basically, and they're only at half their size now. So then the report was saying that these trees are never likely to, they won't achieve their mature size and mature growth because of the location that they're in. So we were going to do some more consultation with residents on the estate about the tree removal before we did anything, and certainly we picked up through the consultations before this report's come here that obviously the correct species of trees and the size of the trees and then the maintenance of the trees that go in is really important. So we'll make sure that that is in place before we do any tree works, and work with the council's own tree team to make sure that those management arrangements are put in place. We can monitor that.
Thank you. Okay, Harmony. Oh, well, actually, if there are no other questions or responses, can I ask if you would to put the recommendations to the vote, which is on page 27 at 2. Oh, just a 2, it's just a single recommendation. Those in favour of the recommendation, put your hands up, please.
It's actually unanimous, Chair.
Okay. Excellent. Unanimity is what we always want. Now, Councillor Bird, do you accept the recommendation?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. I've done my bit now, so it's over to the chair of the committee to take the rest of the meeting.
Thank you for chairing part 1. We now turn to agenda item 6, pledge to support the resettlement of refugees. Could the Community Safety Manager, Karen Jali, introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. So Cambridge City Council has been proudly working with refugees on resettlement programmes for over a decade, and this report recommends that we continue this commitment by updating and consolidating our 2020 and 2021 resettlement pledges into a new pledge. Both of the previous pledges have been successfully achieved, and if agreed, this new consolidated pledge will last from 2025 to 2030. The pledge commitments are outlined in point 1.1 of this report and have been agreed in consultation with local charities and organisations that work with refugees. The Council has achieved great success in its resettlement work over the past 5 years in a time of heightened humanitarian need. Our team of multilingual support workers support refugees to integrate into their new neighbourhoods and enable them to access school places, healthcare, English classes, benefits and employment. And when surveyed last year, 82% of those surveyed who we supported felt a sense of belonging in their neighbourhood and 84% felt welcomed in the UK. We're a proud city of sanctuary, and if the committee agree this pledge, it would allow us to continue our commitment to those who seek sanctuary in Cambridge.
Thank you very much. I'm going to questions now. Beth, sorry, excuse me, Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Very happy with Beth, thank you. And thank you, Karen. I've spent many years working with refugees and previously ran a refugee charity, and I know from experience that what refugees most want is just the support to get on with their lives and rebuild their lives and the opportunity to do so. So I'm really proud of Cambridge City Council's record in this area and really welcome this commitment here today. I wonder whether you can share any assessment you've done of, what Cambridge City Council's proposal, how it compares and our work compares to perhaps other councils across the country. Are we demonstrating best practice and good standards? It'd be great to hear more about how we compare to other councils.
So I think the needs are as you will know, the needs are different in different local authority areas depending on the groups of people seeking sanctuary. So some local authority areas will have a high number of people who are seeking asylum, whereas in Cambridge City we have a high proportion of people who have refugee status, and so the challenges that people face because of their status are different. We have done a needs assessment with refugees in the past few months, and we're going to be using that to inform our work going forward. So we've focused on those with lived experience and their needs and looking at what barriers they face as part of our work. I think there are some national challenges that people face. So for example, access to healthcare, access to dentistry, particularly in Cambridge, is a challenge, and school places can also be a challenge. So we have done some benchmarking work around our grants with other local authority areas like Islington, and we're using that to inform a development of our grant work with refugees. But I think that we have recognised best practice in this area. We've had central government come and visit Cambridge City Council to meet with the refugees that we support and look at the work that we do in terms of supporting people to access secure housing. And we're also highly recognised in the region in the east of England for our long-standing around resettlement work.
Thank you. Councillor Tong.
Good evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank officers for their hard work on supporting refugees around the city. I think it's an immensely valuable thing and something that I'm very proud of the council for doing. Something I wanted to acknowledge was that our previous pledge did have a target of supporting 200 refugees in resettlement, and although I understand why a target hasn't been provided this time, which is because we greatly exceeded that target, making coming up with a target a bit redundant if it's just going to be something we do a lot more than, it might be useful to see a bit more quantifiable data at some point about the work we do, about the number of people we're supporting in different capacities, just so councillors can get an understanding of the work we're doing and be able to be reassured that we're doing good work on this, which it does seem we're doing anyway. That's the only comment I had to make. I think this is a really good thing we're doing, and would like to reiterate my thanks to council officers.
Would you like to respond to that?
What would you be looking for in terms of a breakdown or quantifiable data? Because I think that would be helpful to understand. We do collect and report data into central government on the work that we do around resettlement. So we report on people who've been able to access English classes, people that have been supported into employment, people that are how we support people to navigate the healthcare system and get access to healthcare. So there are a range of things that we capture in terms of our resettlement work, and working with people in their journey to independence in their new lives in the city. So there is lots that we do there and do capture. The schemes do differ. The government schemes are very different, and so our requirements for each scheme relate to, are different by that nature. So it'd be helpful to understand the level of detail that you may be looking for in committee. And also, I think what we would do is look to balance that out with the guidance from the City of Sanctuary in terms of reporting on work around refugees.
Councillor Tong, would you like to engage with the officer online, perhaps, by email?
Oh, yeah, shall I respond to the comments made quickly, or would you prefer me to just move on?
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I'd just like to say, firstly, I want to quickly acknowledge the importance of sensitivity around this topic. I understand that some of this stuff is probably best shared with councillors specifically. I was trying to more suggest that updates would be more regular updates would be useful, and on this data that is collected, because I know you must collect this information, and to have that intermittently passed on to councillors might be useful. I understand as well that, well, there's only a certain amount of detail it's reasonable to get into, so I would ask as much as it's easy and you're willing or able to provide would be helpful, basically. I can't ask for you to obviously go into infinite depths, but if you have data at hand, that would be really useful if you could pass it on just so we can monitor how this project's going. I think it's a really good thing.
Thank you. Councillor Gawthorpe-Wood.
Well, thank you very much for all the work you're doing and for the report. I know that when the Ukrainian war started, we did have a lot of briefings, of course, about the data that you're having to collect and the systems. One of the things I wanted to ask was, and I think it is actually covered in the paper, but a lot of residents I don't think quite are not aware of this, is what are the grant sources that we have, and are the full costs covered, certainly for the housing. So I understand that we have 37 properties that we've bought under the, I can't remember what it stands for, LAHF scheme, Housing for Local Authority Housing for Refugees scheme. But if you could comment on this, what are the grant sources and are the full costs covered, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the resettlement work that we provide, the holistic support that we provide, that is fully funded through central government grants. We receive funding based on the number of individuals who are resettled in the city, and so the wraparound support is fully funded by central government. In terms of the local authority housing fund, there are funds that the council has agreed to cover the full cost of that housing, but the grant offered by the government through the local authority housing fund is at a better rate than the grant offered through Homes England, and so it was seen as a financially good decision for the council to invest in these properties because it was a better rate of grant than we would receive through central government through Homes England.
Thank you. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, we can move to the voting on the recommendation on page 33 of the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Thank you very much, and thank you, Karen, for your report. Does the Executive Counselor for Housing approve the recommendations?
I do, Chair, and thanks, Kieran.
Thank you. I think we can now move on to agenda item 7. This is the Cambridgeshire Housing Adaptations, Repairs and Renewals Policy, 2025 to 2030. Could the Housing Strategy Manager, Helen Reid, introduce this item, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. This report recommends the approval of a revised housing adaptations, repairs and renewals policy for 2025 to 2030, as you've just said, to replace the existing policy, which was approved in 2019. You'll see that the proposed policy is at Appendix A to the report, with a summary at Appendix B, and there's also a quality impact assessment at Appendix C. So just a quick summary. The policy covers the types of the financial assistance to be awarded to eligible applicants on low incomes, and that's in relation to provision for people with disabilities through disabled facilities grants, or DFGs as we often refer to them, DFG top-ups and relocation grants, and also for some other improvements to help people live safely and independently at home. The proposed policy also allows for other one-off capital projects or initiatives aimed at meeting the policy's objectives. Implementation of the policy would, as now, continue to be funded by the Disabled Facilities Grant allocation, which is a capital funding allocation which is awarded to the council each year by government and can be used for capital purposes. Officers are also asking for delegated authority should there be a need to make certain changes during the life of the policy. And that would include any changes to the maximum amounts of a financial assistance payable to applicants, which might need to change if circumstances change, decisions around funding of additional capital projects, and any other minor amendments that might be needed. As it says in the report, although the aim is to have a joint policy across all 5 Cambridgeshire districts, there are some local differences, so the Executive Council is being asked to approve the policy just as it relates to Cambridge City. So hopefully that provides a useful summary. Frances Swan is also on the call. She's manager of the Home Improvement Agency responsible for implementing the policy for Cambridge. So she and I, I'm sure, are both happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the underspend. Could you explain that, and what are the plans for the future there?
Would you like me to answer that, Helen?
Yes, I was going to say, Francis, it might be.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. Last year, we've had an underspend over a few years now, actually. And last year and the year before, we actually employed a project officer to specifically target Cambridge City to try and increase awareness of the Disabled Facilities Grant, network with communities, and try and drive up demand and expenditure against that underspend. Despite all of our efforts really to maximise those opportunities. And if I explain to you, we actually reached out to over 1,000 residents in 15 public facing events, 30 professional organisations across sort of health and social care, targeted streets with leaflet drops to the tune of 1,400 properties, and lots of other things really. We still are not getting the demand for the Disabled Facilities Grant that we would expect to have in this area. So it does mean that we need to look at what other capital projects we can do, and certainly there are national examples of really good and focused and targeted projects such as discharge related projects or dementia projects or quick hit grants and other sorts of things that we would want to facilitate and enable in Cambridge City to make sure that we are spending the money that we have. In addition to that, over the last few years as well, in the autumn period, we have had an additional allocation, which we have actually chosen to reallocate to Huntingdonshire District Council as part of our shared service partnership across the 3 district councils, because their demand is far higher than ours, and obviously it's in the greater good of Cambridgeshire, both in terms of health and social care needs, if that money is utilised rather than being returned to government nationally.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Councillor Gothrop Wood.
Thank you for the report. I did wonder how many adaptations that we've done in the last year and in the last few years. It'd be really useful to see these in a table. And tied to Councillor, to our chair's, dear, Councillor Griffin's question on the underspend, I would find it really helpful to try and forecast demand. I mean, we have a younger age structure in Cambridge than other areas. Now, obviously, you know, we're not, you know, adaptations may be needed for people who need them at any age, but it would be very helpful to look at the numbers who've had, by age group, who've had needed adaptations, and then project forward using the population projections. So that would be about forecasting demand in this area and comparing it with, say, Huntingdonshire or elsewhere in Cambridgeshire. And that might give us some indication of the risks of either an overspend or an underspend. So I'd like to see that. I did have another question, which was really about the saving, you know, people being aware of the savings cap and the flexibility around that amongst the public. Because I know from my own residents, often they're not completely aware of this. I certainly recognise you've been out and about at lots of events, because I have that many leaflets from Kia that I've picked up during my mayoral year. So thank you for that. Anyway, so 2 questions there. Thank you.
Francis, I
Okay,
think they're probably for you again.
thank you. Yeah, and I'll come back on those 2 points. Thank you very much. The first one, I don't have those figures in front of me. In terms of the number of adaptations, it's around about 80 per annum in Cambridge City. Our spend is around about £540,000 each year against a budget of about £827,000 each year. So there is, as you've highlighted, a considerable underspend there. In terms of the data and the demography, we do have that information. As I said, I don't have it handy. I'd be happy to provide that to you after committee. And in terms of forecasting, we've done some of that work. It's very difficult to forecast from one year to another. And sometimes as well, it's not just about the kind of demographic need or the clinical need of patients. It can also be about the life of the equipment or the adaptation that's been installed. So, for instance, if you install a hoist today, you would expect that to last 5 years, and then you'll get a cycle of hoists and things like that coming back, or whatever the equipment type might be. In terms of comparison with other districts as well, as you quite rightly highlight, we do have a young population in Cambridge. We also have an affluent area here in Cambridge, which in part, of course, explains why people aren't eligible for a means-tested grant. South Cambs has an older population by and large, same sort of affluence issues, and then Huntingdonshire has much higher health demands than what the city does. So there is, in comparison, we kind of know why one district is overspending essentially and another is underspending. In terms of that latter point that you made about savings cap, the only savings cap that exists really is part of the means test, which is a disregard for £6,000 worth of savings. There isn't really any other savings cap. The means test is a outdated means test that we would very much like to be updated, and something we have spoken to MPs about, and it is based very much on more to do with income and pensions and things like that do mean that a lot of people aren't eligible for the grant. One of the reasons that we want to increase the sum that's available for the Disabled Facilities Grant top-up, as you'll see in the reports that Helen's presented, is that what we are finding, particularly with children's cases, is that we do quite often, we are asked to extend properties where the household is too large and disabled needs can't be met. And that has resulted in, obviously, construction costs have increased. So what was a £40,000 extension perhaps 5 years ago is now likely to be a £60,000 extension. And without that top-up funding, we're unable to fund that work. So we welcome, given particularly that we're in a good financial position, the opportunity to be able to facilitate more adaptations, particularly those more major adaptations that help to keep families together and at home and out of the social care system.
Thank you. Councillor Martinelli.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just to follow up on the same theme as the previous questions, I think the underspend's a really interesting question, and I think you've done a convincing job of explaining that you've essentially done all the advertisement that you can about it. So I guess my question was about whether there other angles have been looked at. Are we confident, for example, that the application process is as permissive or as easy as it can be for people? I wasn't exactly clear from reading the report whether it was entirely based on self-referrals or whether referrals from other agencies, occupational therapists, etc., are accepted, and if not, whether that might be helpful. And I wondered whether we tracked things like how many people express an interest in the work before not following it up with all the many documents they seem to need to provide based on the policy, and whether the application process was similarly based to those in places like Huntingdon, where clearly they are getting a lot more expressions of interest and completed applications. So as you say, it may just be demographic factors, but it's obviously quite interesting that that's come through in the report, and I think relevant to the policy. So I'd appreciate your input on that, really.
Again, happy to answer some of those if you'd like. Thank you very much for those questions. The first one I think was about the application process and whether it's easy or not. We actually employ a team of caseworkers whose role it is through the Home Improvement Agency, and its main function really is to go out and actually help people to fill in those forms, obtain the necessary support evidence documents that's needed. So we very much handhold people through the application process. We go through the process of, we act as agents on their behalf, essentially they appoint us as agents, and we make sure that we do all the planning application, the building control processes, and the landlord consent processes that are required as part of the application process. We've also looked at whether we can do more work digitally to make the application process more simple, but actually that's quite complicated in itself to try and facilitate. So it's really one-to-one support that we give in recognition of the needs of this particular group. In terms of access to the service, the Disabled Facilities Grants regulations, the law essentially requires that there is consultation with social services. That takes the form of 95% of our cases and referrals coming through as part of an occupational therapy assessment, because people's needs have to be assessed. So an OT will go out and carry out a clinical assessment, and they will then make the referral onto our service. So as I said, that makes up about 95% of the work that we do, and it's almost a requirement really as part of the regulations in order to satisfy the criteria for a disabled facilities grant. We do also offer a non-grant service for those who need to pay and are self-funding. That often still goes through the occupational therapy service, although we have got a team of trusted assessors in the agency who can also carry out assessments on a more simple basis for people who have to self-fund. An extra part in terms of expressions of interest I just wanted to pick up on, because I think you said, has there been any analysis done of why people, if for instance they express an interest and then don't follow through, why that is? So we do have around about 1,000 expressions of interest made every year. It's something called a preliminary means test, where people come to us and say, you know, we need an adaptation, and can I complete a means test form to see if I'm eligible? So we know that a large number of those 1,000 applicants, and this is across the 3 districts, that they're not eligible for a grant, and therefore they either go away and self-serve, or they don't have an adaptation and move, or they simply don't have an adaptation, leaving them at risk, which is another reason why we want to have a more flexible policy. So we have done some analysis already of expressions of interest and why people don't follow up with the service. And just picking up in comparison to Huntingdonshire, that last comment there, I think the thing that's worth mentioning, and I believe is contained in the report, is that Huntingdonshire, unlike Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire, is not a stock retaining council. So across both South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City, we spend around about £1.6 million in addition to our Disabled Facilities Grant budget on adapting council homes. In Huntingdonshire, because it's a housing association there, following stock transfer many years ago, the Disabled Facilities Grant actually pays for the adaptation there. So we spend around about another £1 million on housing association properties in Huntingdonshire. That is met through the housing revenue account in Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, I'll follow up on that one first. although the city still retains its housing stock in Cambridge, there are a lot of housing associations here, and they are eligible, presumably. How much money are we able to allocate to them each year, or any idea?
Councillor Robertson, off the top of my head, I don't have that figure here. Normally, it's around about sort of 60% of our annual spend per district is spent on, with the exception of Huntingdonshire, is spent on social housing. So that would be the housing associations that make up the rest of the Cambridge social housing picture.
It also covers the city council, presumably.
That's right, yeah. We work with a lot of housing association tenants, and they are funded through the Disabled Facilities Grant. As I said, off the top of my head, that makes up about 60% is my estimate.
That's fine. What you're saying is 60% of the money you spend is on social housing, whether it's us or the housing associations. Good. That's a good guide, thank you. What I was originally going to ask about was the means testing, which you've answered to some extent. It sounds as though the means testing is not within our control at all. It's something set by the government. And how long ago was it, or is an element of it upgraded with inflation, or is the whole thing rather out of date?
The whole thing is rather out of date. I believe, and I'm not certain about this, but I believe it actually dates back to 1996, so it's very out of date. There has been, Helen will correct me if I'm mistaken on that, there has been sort of leads of the council have written to MPs to express our concern about the means test. And in the report as well, under the special purposes grant, you'll see that we've wanted to be more flexible, and we are including council tax reduction associated with income as a passported benefit for special purposes grants, which will facilitate access to more of that particular type of grant for those on a low income.
Well, that's something anyway. And the final question is, if we're not able to fund people because they've got their own reserves, are we at least able to provide them with the advice they need to get the work done? I think you were saying that, but can you express that a bit more?
I can, of course. Around about 5 years ago, we recognised that one, for the agency, we're fee earning service, so it's an income stream opportunity for us. But also there are many people who are self-funding, not eligible for grants, who simply don't have the ability to manage appointing builders, going through a planning or building control process, and all the complications that go with that. So we do offer a paid for service, which is more or less exactly the same as a grant recipient would get. And the caseworkers within the agency do go out and again support and enable people to access adaptations should they choose to. Of course, we do charge the 15% plus VAT fees for that, as we do for everybody accessing a disabled facilities grant as well.
Right, well, you're describing to us a very good service, so apart from the means testing, which is not within our control. That's very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. I should have put a declaration of interest here because I've actually used this service myself. And they adapted my kitchen and my shower room. So they made my bungalow, so I was independent. So I could do anything myself. And I think it's a fantastic service. And, you know, if you know of anybody who's suffering like that and needs help, tell them to get in touch. It's very important. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bird. Harmony, do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually had a whole rash of questions, but I think I'll email most of them to you, but there are a few I'd like to actually look at. Means testing. The report talks about requiring co-owners and partners to be means tested, but it also talks about decisions being made in the best interest of the person applying for the grant. Does this system have a way of taking into account financial control, which is something that frequently happens, gender-based and disability-based, and a means test, which includes a partner, is really not going to adequately capture the situation when the partner is controlling the person with their finances. So that was the first question. And it says DFGs are not available to provide facilities for the use of mobility scooters. Are there any other funds for that purpose? And there's something about fees, and if the work's not being paid not being done by 12 months, the council being able to, basically stop anything and pull back the grant. But what if the 12 months is caused by delays with contractors? Is there some leeway around that? And that'll do for now.
I'll attempt to answer all of those. Helen, I might need to defer to you on what that last point was actually on the 12-month fees. Thank you very much for that. You're quite right that we have included, particularly for special purposes assistance grants, the need to means test both the partner or partner within the property. That's because we have situations with regard to co-owners where particularly where we're working in owner-occupied private homes, particularly in Cambridge, where somebody will come to us who is wanting an adaptation and the property is co-owned by somebody else as well. And we're conscious that some of the adaptations that we carry out do actually add quite a lot of value to the property potentially as well. So we think it's appropriate that co-owners are means tested. In terms of partners being means tested, that's actually a requirement of the legislation for the means test anyway, so there's nothing that we can do about that. That is a requirement. Picking up on, I think, the theme though of your point here is about sort of financial control really, in particular where there's coercive control involved. And we do actually identify that both in terms of domestic partners, but also in terms of children perhaps dealing with parents' finances. And we do query and challenge quite frequently where we think that applications are not being progressed in the best interest of the client, because obviously best interest is vitally important. But of course, because we're asking for both the applicant and their partner's income, there's no real way of hiding that income really. That has to be declared. So coercion doesn't tend to be so much of an issue there because, as I said, it has to be declared. The bigger issue there is where somebody doesn't want to spend their money, quite frankly, on carrying out an adaptation, which could potentially place somebody at risk. And that's where, again, our caseworkers do have to do a lot of support and advice and influence people where possible to talk about the benefits of having this adaptation done, rather than leaving people at risk of harm. Really, I hope that's explained and answered some of those questions. In terms of mobility scooters, no, we don't fund them. They're not covered by the Disabled Facilities Grant, and I regret that I'm not aware of alternative sources of funding for that, but could find out an update after the meeting. So I'll defer to Helen on the fees 12 months point, because I'm not quite sure what that was.
Yeah, I think what Councillor Birch is suggesting is that it's around the expectation that works will be completed within 12 months of the grant approval. Is that correct? And your question, I think, was around whether or not, if that was down to contractor delays, would that be enforced? And I think, probably so can speak on behalf of Francis and say, that would be, those things would be taken into account. I think that's more aimed at where people are holding things up or not progressing for, there might be very good reasons for them not progressing it, but there may be reasons where they're sort of delaying for maybe reasons that aren't reasonable. So I think that's what that covers it. But it's got flexibility in there. It's certainly not hard and fast. And we'd be looking at the circumstances of the case really.
And building on that as well, Helen, what we do sometimes have to do is a reapproval, essentially. So if an application goes out of time, we would do a reapproval. The grants officers and the district councils would do that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I would like to thank Helen and Francis for their presentation. And we can move on to the vote of the recommendation on page 51 of the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous in favour, Chair.
Unanimous, wonderful. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendation?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. We have two more items on the agenda, and I'm wondering, do we need a short comfort break, or should we go through, continue? Who would like a comfort break? I see some hands up, so 10-minute break then. Thank you. Thank you. Let us return to the agenda, and in particular, agenda item 8, City Center Regeneration Sites. Could the Assistant Director of Development, Ben Binns, introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm just going to do a summary of the report. We called this City Centre Sites Report because we were hoping to report a bit more on some of the other schemes. So it's predominantly on Stanton, but there is a brief update on East Road, and the key update on East Road is that it's not ready for a planning submission. Councillors, officers and our partners we are struggling to make this viable for the council or for KIT. So we will report back as required on that one. We are planning to meet residents of East Road either in the later end of March. If we can't make March, then we'll do that in May after the pre-election period to let them know what the next steps may be. In terms of Hanover and Princess, we have made more progress on that, and we've had a very positive pre-application with the planners. That was held on the 18th of February, and it is a very constrained site for those of you who know it, and we needed to get some principles signed off on height and massing and in terms of the open space that's there. So we are hopeful that we can make a submission in spring 2025, and we will provide an update at the next HSC. And we've just put a point there what we were hoping to achieve, which was 130 new homes and between 40 and 60% being affordable. So we are on track to beat that, we hope. So we will report back accordingly. The main bulk of the report on this report is on Stanton. So just to cast your mind back, on June 2024, this committee approved to decant residents of Stanton House, and the main reason for that due to fire risk, and it was felt that it was appropriate to move residents out. I'm pleased to say that all residents have been moved out to new accommodation. This development was 33 flats. I say flats, they're studio flats and quite small in size, and it was a form of specialised housing with some warden provision. Our proposal to bring forward is for 29 new homes. Now, these 29 homes, although it seems smaller in the number of units, they are larger. So they're 50 square metres as opposed to about, for one bed flat, as opposed to about 30 square metres for a studio flat. And we would like to have a mix of 1 bed, 2 bed and 3 bed on site. Now the 3 bed is probably one 3 bed flat for that. We are intending to make it 100% affordable following the housing strategy, planning requirements. We do think there will be a need for some specialised housing on the site, so that might be up to 3 flats being specialised housing, and we will of course endeavour to meet our 5% for wheelchair, and all the flats will be wheelchair accessible. We've got a predicted cost of around 10 million. That includes on costs, and that is based on current costs that we are developing out on places like Aylesbury and other sites that we have priced. I think that covers most of the key points in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Diana Mintz.
A couple. First of all, it's the Hanover and Princess Court. As an ex-resident, have we still got a community room in the plans? And is there a format? Who's going to be running it? Because I knew that was a sticking point, but I think it's important to have that there because you're redeveloping the site. That's number one. Number two, issue of Stanton House, there's some things in there that I'm certainly, though myself and Harmony would have concerns about, the predictions about how many, support, rented housing with support might be needed in the future. We may be a young city, but we're also an ageing city, and I think we need to recognise that and make sure that we have a reasonable analysis of our own tenant base, council tenant base, to predict in some ways, using that, I'm sure you do, who may be wanting, may not need it now, but may want it in the future. And and I think you suggested the statistics in this table you've got on page 146, I think, is perhaps not based on the most reliable of data if you were doing it over the kind of COVID times. So that's something. Allied to that, so it's three questions. The other one is, Stanton House had a lot of people who were ex-homeless there, and I just wonder what provision we as a city, or generally I think as the county overall and its strategies, make for the older homeless, because people are living longer, they often die young, homeless people, often they live longer with medical interventions, and that's a whole group that doesn't necessarily fit in to us, not necessarily for a variety, into our standard sort of shelter or supported housing. Just a thought, and whether we've given that any thought. I've asked it other places about this, but it's sort of got tacked onto things and gets vaguely forgotten. Thank you.
Okay, Chair. So on Hanover and Princess, that community room, the planners have been very clear that does need to be re-provided. Now, we are working with community colleagues in the communities team on how we do that. We do have to balance planning requirements or planning need with how this will operate and run. And of course, there's a financial implication with that. So I haven't got a definitive answer yet, but I will be able to report back next time for that. But it is on our radar and we are grappling with that question. In terms of the second question, the data in the report is provided to make clear that as a development team, as a council, we have to respond to that data. So part of our application is making the case with working with our housing colleagues that there is a greater demand for general needs housing in this city over specialised housing. And what the data in the report is trying to show is that there is quite significant provision of specialised housing. But of course, we are guided by our housing colleagues in terms of what is the best way to go about in terms of provision. So that's not we're not necessarily commenting on the data. We're simply saying that's the data that we have to respond to. Do you want to add something? Yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to pick up on your final point, if that's okay, Ben, around older homelessness residents. So I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think the reason there was a high proportion of residents of that case type in Stanton House was that they were the only ones that generally accepted the studio flats. They were quite small. They were not desirable kind of more generally. So, obviously all of those residents in Stanton House, we have reallocated those that continue to have a need for sheltered, have gone into other sheltered schemes within our portfolio. We've also managed to relocate some to what was the old haven is now called Longdrift Place. So there's no confusion with the other haven, it takes a city haven, and we will continue obviously to house residents who are older but homeless. We can still provide that accommodation in our existing units. It just explains why there was a particularly high proportion in Stanton House itself.
I understand why that happened, and it's sad that it did, but I can understand why it did, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner-Smith.
Thank you. My question follows on from that, the final comment you made, and it was about this move-on accommodation. I just wondered what other move-on accommodation we provide in the city centre, because as you note, the residents from Stanton House have been moved to other sheltered housing. Is that within the city centre? Are we providing Are we providing sheltered accommodation for that group within the city centre still?
So as with all of our decanting programs, actually we worked with people on their individual needs. So for some, actually they were perfectly happy to go into general needs accommodation. They had no real requirements for sheltered, so we were able to facilitate that. At the other extreme, we had some that maybe needed extra care now. Their needs had deteriorated since they'd gone into Stanton House. So again, we were able to work with them and get them into places like Ditchburn Place. So if somebody wanted to be in a city centre location, we tried to accommodate that as much as possible. We didn't have to force anybody to accept any offers. We did work with them all and got them accommodation that they wanted.
Thank you. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. This was actually partly in response to the last question. I was just going to add that in our homelessness prevention grants this year, we are funding an older homeless floating support service. Bit of a mouthful, but essentially some support from Cambridge Cyrenians for people who are over 45 and are homeless. So that's only one part of the answer to your question, but that is something in addition that we are funding and supporting.
Thanks for that. Councillor Martinelli.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say thank you very much for the report. I think it's really useful, and I think as a ward councillor and as the opposition group, we're very supportive of this scheme and looking forward to seeing further details and liaising further on Hanover and Princess as well. So just thank the officers for all their work and for their engagement with us as councillors. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, yes. This scheme is for will provide 29 affordable homes, and previously there were 32 there, so we're losing them because they were very small, the ones before, I guess. But of the 29, what size units will they be, and what rent type will they be charged, and how big are the units?
So happy to answer that. So you are right, and I did mention in the introduction, so the units have gone down, but the provision or the square meterage has gone up. So the current number 33 is approximately, if they're studio apartments, approximately 35 square meters per space. The minimum one-bed flat is 50 square meters. Two-bed flat, you're looking at 65 square meters, and a three-bed flat closer to 80. So the space is increased, the habitable rooms have increased. In terms of the rent, our starting point is always housing strategy. So 100% affordable scheme will assume some social rent, some at 60% and some at 80%. We will then consult with our housing colleagues to understand what's appropriate for that area. The 80% rent may not be appropriate, and we'll balance what the financial metrics will need to be made versus what we would like to see provided there in terms of rent. If we also get funding from Homes England, that might also dictate a move towards social rent. So at this stage, it's watch this space. We've got a housing strategy to back us, but we will consult housing colleagues and try and get some funding for it.
And the units will be one bed, or what was it? I don't think, did you mention bedroom size?
So the size, so I think in terms of the numbers, if we're looking at 29, I would expect almost half, one bed, two beds, but I'd like to see at least 1 3-bed on there if we can accommodate that. That depends on discussions with planners. So in terms of sizes, the one bed is 50 square meters, so that's almost from 30 to 50. It's quite a leap. This is national space standards, which is part of our policy for any affordable. 2-bed, I think, is 65 square meters, and then 3-bed, you're looking at 80 plus square meters for a flat.
Great, sounds very good anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 questions about Hanover and Princess Court. This is probably really obvious, but I'd just like to, if you could clarify, where it says 138 new homes, including 40 to 60% affordable homes for rent. is that 40 to 60% out of 138 new homes, or is it the financial percentage reduction for rent? In which case, what's the total number of affordable rents at 40 to 60%?
So, yes, so I see where you're coming from. So 4.1 is just a reminder of what we thought we could get on that site. So 138. So that was our starting point. In terms of how much affordable we could provide on that site, we went for a range, 40 to 60% of 138. What we are hopeful for, and we're very encouraged by the last pre-app, is that we will be above 138, but we may be on the lower side of that range, depending on financial viability. If we are outside 138, in other words, below, or we're outside of 40%, then we would need to come back to committee and ask for another approval. So it's just a note to say that's what we're aiming to get. I'm hoping to report in the next committee it will be improved and that the percentage will meet the percentages in that range.
Thanks very much. That's a very clear answer. The other thing is that at the moment there's a courtyard, a sort of garden in the centre. Is there any provision in the new plans for a similar thing, or is it going to be individual sort of private, small private gardens? And the final thing is, when is the demolition date? Because I work right next to it and there's only about 1 or 2 people actually living in it. It's like a ghost town and it's dropping to bits very, very quickly. And it'd be good if something can be done quite quickly rather than waiting until next year, for example. Thank you.
So one of the requirements for this application, or the planners are very keen on, and we're very keen on as a council, is making sure the biodiversity improves. And part of that is really enhancing that space and that square, however it looks in the final design. It's very, very important. It's also very important to market. Ward councillors, they've been pressing to ensure that open space is suitable for children, suitable for the residents as well. So that's very much in our plan. In terms of demolition, we haven't got a date. So as soon as we submit for planning, we will have a timeline for demolition. What we will do then is meet residents ahead of that, because it is a constrained site. There's all sorts of dust risks and so on, and we'll want to meet the residents just to explain the timeline, what that might mean, what happens when you see mud, who can you go to, who can you contact, and we'll do all of that in good time ahead.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Harmony Birch?
Yeah, thank you very much for this report. It's very interesting and comprehensive. I just do have, I think, basically 3 questions. Page 147, under physical disability, it suggests that the model you're working on projects the demand for supported living for people with physical disability will reduce to 0 by 2026. That makes absolutely no sense at all. It does nod to fluctuations, and the period used for this modelling is the COVID period, which will have been very different. But if you are making your plans based on flawed data, you will end up with flawed plans, and that is really problematic. The second question, Princess Court. I lived in Princess Court. I still have a copy of Open Door with our garden after it had won the garden competition on the front of Open Door. Beautiful gardens, a lot of biodiversity, a lot of care had gone into those gardens. You look at what's happening there now, it's a trash dump. Are the plans going to include suitable outdoor space to A, promote biodiversity, but also to give tenants a chance to be involved in the same way in developing beautiful gardens, which will keep them A, active and involved with nature, and yeah, basically. And there was a third question, which now doesn't make sense to me, so I'll forget it.
Okay, can I? Yep, thank you, Chair. So the last point about the gardens, absolutely. It is a small site, but we want to maximise it as much as we can with community involvement. The kids from the two schools nearby to use it. We want to bring it back to life for the residents and for the community. That also does mean that I've lost my chain of thought there. Oh, biodiversity. On the biodiversity, there is a commitment to improve it by 20%. Now, there are some trees there. Any trees that we do have to take out, we will then be looking at planting more trees and more than just saplings, because I note your point earlier about that, and that's important for us. In terms of that table, I think you're referring on page 146. Okay, I will take that away and ask where we got that from, but as far as I'm aware, that is from content from elsewhere. It's not our own writing, but I will take that away and get a more definitive response, and we'll put it in the notes as well. Thank you for highlighting that.
I actually have remembered what the third question was, and it was just quickly in relation to Stanton House and the fact that I am concerned that we are building our provision for elderly and disabled based on flawed data. It was we are losing 33 specialist units, which though they were unfit for purpose, there were still 33 units. And in return, we're getting 3. So does that mean we actually have a lot of voids in specialist units elsewhere? Or are we making plans based on future predictions?
So I'm happy to come in there, Harmony. So we do find that our sheltered accommodation is not as popular as our general needs. Even for people who are over the age threshold for sheltered, many of them still prefer to go into a general needs property rather than a sheltered. I think we've already talked about, in previous committees about we probably do need to reflect on that and what our offer is for older persons accommodation going forwards. I would also highlight that we have just brought online Longdrift Place, previously known as the Haven, which is 8 units of sheltered accommodation. So that is in addition to the 3. Unfortunately, also due to the nature of the residents in sheltered accommodation, we do find that they become available more often. So as people's needs perhaps deteriorate and they may go into extra care, or unfortunately they may pass away, it does mean we get higher numbers of voids. So even though we do have waiting lists for sheltered, we tend to find people can actually get accommodation quite quickly, much quicker than they would general needs.
Great. Thank you for those questions, Harmony. Unless there are other questions, there are no more questions, it seems. I think I can thank Ben Binns for his report and responses. We will now go to vote on the recommendations on page 142 of the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous in favour, Chair.
Unanimous. Wonderful. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendation?
I do, Chair, and thank you for your report, Ben. Thanks.
Wonderful. We will now turn to the last item on the agenda, item number 9, update on the new build council housing delivery. Please, could the Assistant Director for Development, Ben Binns, introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. So I'll highlight the key points of the report. So the first point to note, we have delivered 1,050 new homes. That's 732 council homes, of which 656 are net council homes. And in the last month, in February, we handed over Colville 3, so another set of council homes have been handed over. I'd like to turn to 4.22. We've got, because we're not stopping, we've got 4 more schemes coming onto line. That's Fanshawe Road, ATS Mercotts Newbury Farm, and East Barnwell approximately 450 homes about to go into contract. We are in contract for Fanshawe Road, and we hope Newbury Farm will be completed this week and East Barnwell next week, with ATS Mercats to follow in April. And that's really good news and sets us on another path of more council house building. If I could just draw your attention to an update on Eakin Road. We are having very good pre-application workshops with the planners, and we are aiming for a planning submission in spring 2025. That does mean, and still means, we will still be working with our tenants and leaseholders and freeholders on that site. So planning can still take a year before we start on site, but that is another milestone that we are about to reach. 4.68, we've got an update on the framework for change for North Cambridge. The key update there is a slight change to some of the boundaries on reflection in terms of how we are going to look at the area. The key changes including a section of East Cheston close to the train station there, and you've got a diagram that shows what's been included and what's been excluded. Just want to note for the record, although it's been said earlier, we are working towards a date in May of up to 12 to 13 workshops to meet with the community in North Cambridge from May onwards. So between May and June, there'll be a series of dates that will be published shortly. The next point I just want to highlight is the portfolio approach to development, and that's in the appendix. This is a very important document for planning, but also for our development team to be held to account, because we did highlight the roadmap of the number of homes we had in our pipeline, but also how we would aim to achieve our targets on affordable housing. So in the appendix, I draw your attention to 1.2, and I'll just read out what this states. The purpose of this appendix is to set out the Council's housing delivery programme and the monitoring of that programme to provide a context for the consideration of individual planning applications by the Council or the Cambridge Investment Partnership against the requirements of Policy 45 of the Local Plan 2018. If you then turn over to point 2 and 2.1, you can see a commitment here of what the programme is trying to do. The housing delivery target is to deliver 50% affordable housing across the portfolio. In working to achieve the target, the cumulative portion of affordable housing being delivered by the programme will at no time fall below 40%. And then if you look at table 2 and point 3, you can see how we intend to show our progress, and you will see that from East Barnwell onwards, the new schemes that I just described earlier that are moving into contract, our running total is currently at 60%. And then there are other elements of the appendix that are worth just noting for future reference. 4.10, this is where we are comparing to the housing strategy targets in terms of 1 bed, 2 beds, 3 beds and 4 beds. And it's laid out what their targets are, what the housing strategy targets are, and how we are doing in comparison. And again, there is all there for see and transparent and to be held to account. And then 5 refers to how we're doing on sustainability and what targets we are trying to reach on that. And then if I go back to the main bulk of the report, I just want to highlight a really good set of news. 4.93, we have been given or earmarked funding of 4.5 million towards the first phase of East Barnwell from Homes England. That does rely us on starting on site next week, so the pressure is on to get all our paperwork in place. But that's really, really good news. And then finally, 4.11 just highlights some of the issues that we are facing on heating. There are some issues that we are dealing with our colleagues and our partners in relation to some of the heating problems. We have had a subcontractor that's gone into administration in December, and nationally there has been some supply chain issues in M&E, or this is the heating consultants right across the country, combined with new technology. So it's a bit of a perfect storm in some of our developments, and what this report is acknowledging some of the challenges we're facing and how we're trying to mitigate them and make sure that people have homes where the heating is working, but it is there for transparency. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions? First, I would like to say, that this this report represents really outstanding work, I think, by the city. I think it's important to remember and to remind residents that most authorities, local authorities, have gotten out of the house building business completely because they can't afford it any longer. And whereas Cambridge is doing an outstanding job of building new housing. So I think your group should be commended for their work on this. Councillor Tong.
Oh, there we go. Hello. I would like to briefly talk about the update on Eakin Road, which is on page 160. It's 4.6.4. Now, I am really happy to see progress made on redeveloping the flats on Eakin Road. They were in an absolutely dreadful state, and it's great they're being redeveloped. I know that the vast majority of residents living in those flats are absolutely desperate to leave them, which is why I share some concerns with the public speaker who acknowledged the fact that letters highlighting a deadline for leaving, which would be December, have been sent out while there are 35 tenanted households still on the site. And I don't think that is them not trying. I think that is them struggling. HomeLink can be a very difficult system, and some people have needs which are complicated. And on top of that, many people want to stay integrated into their community or move with family, have that community nearby. So I am really worried that we are going to end up pushing residents out into properties that aren't right for them. And I feel that would be a big betrayal when so many residents have really tried to work with the council. So I was wondering what could be done to step up support in this regard to help residents find a property that is suitable for them. Because to me, this highlights that they need that extra support.
Thank you for your question. I mean, I think the first thing to point out is that we've got an excellent record of finding homes for people in this situation where we are proposing redevelopment. And whilst that letter does feel very officious and technical, it is something that the council has to do in order to comply with the law in terms of redevelopment. And each tenant got a phone call, or at least a follow-up phone call from when they received the letter, inviting them in for a meeting or for one of our team to go and meet the tenant. So efforts will be redoubled, and it doesn't go away. This is the period now we are ensuring that officers are working often with the more vulnerable tenants, and they take longer. No tenant will be pushed or forced out. We've never had to do that before in any of our schemes. So I will take that away, and I'll talk to my team and make sure we redouble. We may have to come back and have a more general meeting with tenants on site, perhaps in the summer, just before the summer. We can look at that. We can bring the exec councillor and with ward councillors and make sure that all tenants are aware what choices they have. So I'll take that away.
Mandy Powell-Hardy?
My question is, Ben, can you please emphasise how many actual properties are there that on Eakin Road that are leaseholders, tenants, and the ones that have moved? You've got leaseholders are on there.
So on that paragraph, we've got 3 out of 9 leasehold properties have started the legal process.
Yeah.
So that's started, and 1 of the 3 freehold properties have been purchased, and I believe 1 is also engaging extensively with our team. So we're making really good progress. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. The other question that I need to ask is Eakin being done before Barnwell?
So, no, East Barnwell starts next Monday, all being well, in terms of contract spade in the ground. That has the first phase has a 2-year programme. All being well, and sometimes in construction things get delayed, but all being well, the first apartments will be handed over in 2 years' time, which may mean for some people at Eakin they can move into, or it may mean that some people who want to move back to the area can move back into the East Barnwell flats.
Will there be subsidised for the shopkeepers? Will there be units put in temporarily like there was at Cherry Hinton?
That's what we're working on at the moment. So obviously the discussions are confidential, but we know who wants to stay, and those that want to stay, and depending on the programme, so there's 1 unit on phase 1, so perhaps we certainly hope one of the retail outlets will move into that new unit. So we need to understand who would like to do that, who would like to stay, and of those that will want to stay, what provision we need to provide, whether it's like the Cherry Hinton provision, which is what we've done, or whether there's something alternative in the area, because we know it's very important for people to have those shops.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ben Binns? Harmony Birch.
Yeah, I've got just one question on page 188, and thank you for this report, by the way. It's been very interesting. And it's about the rent profile you're looking at charging on the new houses. The affordable rent being split between the 3 categories of social rent, affordable rent at 60% capped at LHA, and affordable rent at 80%, targeting local work connections. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, this means that there is going to be less of the lower affordable rents and more of the higher affordable rents. Does this mean that the LHL will be reassessed in light of the new rent profile? And is there a chance that LHL will rise to cover some of this?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, the local housing allowance rate is actually set by central government, so that isn't something that we are able to set at a local level. LHA levels remain static for quite a period of time. They did go up for a couple of years in a row. We have not heard whether they've gone up for this coming financial year or not. Unfortunately, because it obviously affects the Treasury, that is something that we will petition for as part of sort of the spending reviews, etc. But it is outside of our control, unfortunately, Harmony.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. Okay. Do I see a further question? Yes, okay. Councillor Gothrop Wood.
Okay, well, there's two, and the first is, given the amount we're building and some, there will be people purchasing or being moved, who are leaseholders who will be moving into new properties. How do you think the common hold, the new legislation about common hold, will that affect us as a city council and the city homes? That's the first one. If you want to answer that, the other is more of a comment. But
I can answer on new build, but I might have to pass to Sam on existing. So for new build, if common hold comes into law, and we're doing market sale like we did on Mill Road, then we will simply follow the law. So it'll be a common hold. In terms of what that means for 100% affordable block and future right to buy, I don't know, but presumably we'll still do some kind of common hold provision. So that's future schemes. What happens to current schemes, I'll pass to my colleague.
So again, we would ensure that whatever we do is compliant with any legislation that comes in. Sometimes legislation can be retrospective, other times it's for new schemes only, so we will have to wait and see what that looks like. Certainly in terms of right to buys, we are anticipating with I don't know if people have seen it, but there was a significant reduction in the discount that came into effect in November. So it reduced for the Cambridge area from £102,000 to 36,000. So we are anticipating right to buys to reduce as a result of that. There was also extensive consultation from the government on further right to buy amendments, including whether there should be exemptions for new build accommodation. We did respond to that consultation, and if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share the response that we did put forward in response to those right to buy consultations.
thank you. The other point was about North Cambridge framework for development. Yeah, I'm very pleased with what you said about the consultation having 12 to 13 workshops with resident groups, residents and the commercial operators in the area. I do think it is important, the importance of the new design code you mentioned. I think that was largely driven by residents. And I just wanted to emphasise that in the map you showed our existing parks and green spaces are very important and will be protected. And I've said, the important programme of consultation and engagement from May 25 is really important. It's key to this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that was there. So thank you for putting that in. And could you just confirm that the map, I think it could be perhaps misread that the parks are not going to be built on. There are some rumours and I would like to squash those because I know they're wrong. Thank you.
Absolutely. That map is the study area where residents will be invited to give their thoughts about the area. And we know that the parks and the open space are much loved. There may be some areas where they feel it needs more love. And so that's the kind of feedback we're looking for so that we can ensure that what the priorities are for the council fulfil what the people's feedback are saying to us.
Thank you, Ben Binns, for your report and responses. I think it's time to go to the vote. On recommendation on page 157 of the agenda, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed?
Sorry, 6 in favour, none against.
All those abstaining.
And 2 abstentions.
Thank you. Yeah. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendation?
I do, Chair, and thanks, Ben.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. That concludes tonight's Housing Scrutiny Committee. Please, could members leave the chamber promptly and return any used glasses to the red trays outside Committee Room 1. Please, could the meeting producer end the live stream?